Hi, first I want to thank the organizers for inviting me for this desert adventure in a city of lights and clouds. Thank you very much. And okay, let's begin. So, of all strange others that the Assyrians met in their western ventures, desert dwellers were the most outlandish of all. As was the case with other others, the name Arabs appeared as a generic name given by the empire to all semi-nomads residing in the desert of Sinai, Arabia, and Syria. Raising camels and sheep, living in tents, moving from place to place, with their flocks sporadically raiding settlements, in Assyrian eyes, these semi-nomadic groups were all the same, Arabs. Attestation to this sense of ignorance, attestations to this sense of ignorance may be also found in the Khorsabad Annals, where Sargon II records his deportation of Arabs to recently conquered Samaria. Faraway Arabs living in the desert with whom no overseer or governor was familiar, people who had never before brought a king their tribute. Zabibe, a queen of Mat Aribi, is reported to have paid Tiglat-Pileser III tribute, a synonym for exchanging goods. By contrast, another Arabian queen experienced the notorious Assyrian wraith. As for Shamshi, queen of the Arabs, at Mount Sakuri I defeated 9,400 of her people. I took away from her 1,000 people, 30,000 camels, 20,000 oxen, 5,000 pouches of all types of aromatics. Moreover, she, in order to save her life, and set out like a female onager to the desert, a place where one is always thirsty. I set the rest of her possession and her tents, her people's safeguard within her camp, on fire. Shamshi, who was accused of violating the oath sworn by Shamash, fled for her life like a wild she-ass into the desert. However, she was never imprisoned and continued to rule her people, albeit with an Assyrian Kepu now inspecting her. Ancient empires have been traditionally seen as a direct expression of extreme power and brutality exerted on a passive periphery. This image, produced by highly biased imperial records and images, brought scholars to emphasize the unequal nature of interaction between the global and the local. How then to draw the dynamic role that Iron Age II desert communities played in the Arabian trade? Two arid zones located to the east and to the west of Wadi Araba, the Negev and the Edomite Plateau, will use as a case study for the socio-political dynamics that ancient empires exercised over desert trade. The first to set a hegemonic pattern to its Near Eastern successors, was the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Upon expansion into new regions, the Assyrians could choose a variety of strategies to exert their rule, from annexation and integration into the Assyrian provincial system to military control and clientage agreements. Direct Assyrian rule was accompanied by imposition of imperial footprints, attesting the physical presence of Assyrian administrative, economic, and military personnel. Unlike northern Palestine, the western Negev, it has a free will apparently, and the coastal plain, where the Assyrian presence is seen through town planning, architecture, and other material culture manifestation, Edom and the Negev assemblages reflect a strong local tradition, and Assyrian artifacts are limited to a few imported items or local imitations. Contrary to Assyrian propaganda, the evidence shows that Assyria maintained a flexible policy towards its imperial frontiers by signing an array of treaties with local Arab tribes aimed at controlling the Egyptian border and the Arabian trade routes. Thus, Tiglat-Pileser III entrusted to the Idi Be'ilu tribe the office of the gatekeeper over the border of Egypt, proxy authority in the Besor region. In his campaign to the Brook of Egypt, Sargon II granted the entire area of the Besor to the city of Laban, an Arab prince. He then boasted, I opened the sealed-off harbor Cairo of Egypt, mingled Assyrians and Egyptians together, and made them trade with each other. Collaboration with local proxies was an imperial strategy practiced in areas not directly subject to Assyria. This entailed Arab tribal leaders settling in an urban environment and serving the empire's economic and political interests. In return for their loyalty, Arab emissaries were hosted in the Assyrian court, where they received gifts of precious items and rich garments. Assyria's indirect control of the desert frontier left its mark on the elites of local semi-nomads, the so-called Edomites. Imperial imprints can be discerned mainly in the form of elite goods and styles, that is, imported luxury goods, and their imitation. Such items express status due to their scarcity and symbolic value as emblems of power and prestige. Situated on the King's highway that ran from Hamat in Syria down to the Gulf of Aqaba, Edom first arose as a tribal kingdom. By the early 8th century BCE, Edom was subjugated to Assyria. Assyrian sources mention Edom as a client kingdom paying tribute, providing building materials, and sending troops to Assyrian campaigns. Assyrian letters indicate the mode of interaction between the Assyrian Empire and its client. Edomite emissaries are described as bringing gold, silver, horses, and other luxury items to the Assyrian capital. In return, they were feted at the state's expense. Assyrian records mention Transjordanian envoys arriving at Nimrud on the same day as those from Egypt, Gaza, and Judah, implying that they traveled together and perhaps that the tribute caravan was jointly organized, possibly by an Assyrian envoy. Archaeology illustrates another aspect of Assyrian control over Edom. In her excavations at Busayra, the Edomite capital, Crystal Bennett uncovered a large podium that served as the foundation of a monumental edifice. Two public buildings in which Bennett identified Assyrian characteristics were excavated and dated to the late 8th, early 7th centuries BCE. Not yet. On the Acropolis, a building comprising two sets of rooms arranged around two large courtyards at Area A was uncovered. One of these rooms, probably a shrine, shares similarities with the imperial heartland at sites such as Khorsabad and Tel Khalaf, Guzana. Southeast of the Acropolis, a small part of another public building was unearthed, Area C, incorporating a broad hall with a wide shallow niche as well as a bathroom, the plan of a typical Assyrian reception suite. The impressive remains found at Busayra and their resemblance to Assyrian motifs known from Assyria proper support the assumption that by the end of the 8th century BCE, Assyrians were physically present in the Edomite plateau. An Assyrian center was built presenting imperial ceremonies, storage, and administrative services, and Assyrian administrative personnel were stationed within the subjugated Edomite kingdom. At about the same time, on the other side of Wadi Araba, coexistence was at play. Situated in the heart of the biblical Negev, Tel Malchata presents an impressive architecture along with exceptional material culture. Strata 4A, 3B were dated to the 8th, 7th centuries BCE. In this period, the site was encircled by a substantial mud brick wall plastered on both sides and incorporating protruding towers. An inner fortress comprising two mud brick pilasters abutted the inner face of the fortifications and dominated the western part of the town. The intensive use of mud brick sets Malchata apart from other sites. In no other Negevite town was mud brick used so extensively. Rather, town planning at Ira, Aroer, Beersheba, and Arad are typical of other sites across Judah, using local limestone. While other Negev towns were adjusted to the local topography, the situation at Malchata is different. The hill was reshaped and reconstructed to create a rectangular plan, similarly to Busayra at the Edomite plateau. Material culture from Malchata presents a varied ceramic assemblage, including imitations of Assyrian palaceware, Assyrian bottles, among other Judean and so-called Edomite wares, a melange of Judean, Edomite, and Arab scripts and names. Malchata's location, at the heart of the biblical Negev, its distinctive plan, large-scale use of mud bricks, and unique material culture all attest to an Assyrian presence and involvement in the Arabian trade system. This kind of midway control strategy, namely stationing an imperial structure within the territory of a client kingdom, is also evident in nearby areas and in other imperial periods. Rome's imperial presence in the desert has been traditionally identified with a network of Roman fortresses situated along the empire's southern frontier of Palestine and inhabited by Roman garrisons, Limes Palestina. This line of fortifications served for a while in strengthening loyalty of the provinces through recruitment of local groups, but an intensified expansion far beyond the limes made it anachronistic. Some scholars surmise that the word limes was never used in the sense of a defensive wall. Rather, it referred to a sparsely settled region at the edge of the settled land. Agreements signed between the imperial administration and the local elites of the semi-nomads allowed soldiers or veterans to be hired as protectors of desert towns and lands. Thousands of years would pass, and the Ottoman Empire would dramatically change its policy to ignore the desert with the foundation of an administrative center at Beersheba and stable relationship with the local Bedouins and their leaders. Being the only city built by the Ottomans ex nihilo, the land on which Beersheba was built was purchased from local Bedouin tribes who were encouraged to settle there. The sheikhs of the great tribes, El Tayya, El Azazme, and El Tarabin, were convinced to settle in a town of their own. Extending over 500 dunams, the city was divided into 1 dunam plots with wide streets, emphasizing the empire's role as civilizing mission. The town including several public buildings, a saraya, a school, a pool, and a public park. A tribal school for the district's Bedouin sons was a privilege preserved to the sheikhs and nobles' sons. Like their Assyrians and Roman predecessors, there was a clear economic and social gain for the local semi-nomadic elite. In the absence of texts, mute objects, especially ceramics, are often the only mean to connect to ancient commoners' lives. As the most durable material, clay is aesthetic, significant, sentimental. Clay vessels represent the language of their time. Material culture from an Iron Age II site in the Negev illustrate the social strategies exercised by desert trading communities. Situated at the southernmost point of the Beersheba Valley, Tel Aviv is a 20-dunam site displaying an intramural and an extramural neighborhood. 786 vessels and sherds were attributed to a group of vessels known as the Edomite ware. 118 of these belong to the decorated group. This constitutes the largest assemblage of decorated Edomite pottery known so far in the region. The Edomite decorated group form approximately 50% of the decorated pottery at the site. It includes bowls, craters, chalices, incense burners, and stands. The vessels are painted black, red and black, or brown on red slip, white or brown. The common motifs include concentric circles, horizontal stripes, short lines, dots, metops, triglyphs, ladders, nets, and floral patterns. Some bear plastic decoration, such as dentils or projectors. While the motifs are recurring, their composition is variegated. Indeed, no decorative pattern repeats itself. The Aroer Edomite assemblage demonstrates that vessels used for eating, drinking, serving, and ritual purposes were consistently decorated. Prominent among these vessels are bowls, which comprise more than 90% of the decorated types. Decorated Edomite types have been found in various contexts at Tel Aroer, in domestic and industrial contexts, at the intramural and extramural neighborhoods, in a public context, at a building that used as a caravanserai, in my opinion. Examination of the location and quantitative distribution of the Edomite decorated ware in urban space shows that nearly 80% were found in areas located outside the fortification, the caravanserai and the extramural neighborhood. It should be stressed that this phenomenon is not an outcome of differences in the exposure of areas, since the size of the intramural area exceeded that of the extramural. An explanation should be sought in other factors. In times of hegemonic rule, when interaction with the others is intensified, ethnic groups residing in the insular zones often find their identity challenged by flow of global ideas and cultural expressions. Local indigenous response to imperial presence varies from active resistance to quiet opposition. Lacking the urgency of response, craft doesn't challenge things directly, yet it does have staying power. It is part of the cultural apparatus of an ongoing protest or social movement, as it represents the thoughts, reality, lives, and social positioning of its owners. We can thus explore clay as a medium capable of challenging social and cultural issues. An ever-growing interest has led anthropologists working in marginal zones to consider the political and social implications stemming from material culture of frontier areas. Studies often deal with the frontier from a colonial perspective, assuming a unidirectional influence from center to periphery. Thus, the frontier is often depicted as a passive, static, isolated zone whose inhabitants must forego their traditional way of life and assimilate to the culture of the central authority. Contrary to this, a different approach sees the frontier as a zone of interaction and hybridization, which maintains complex relations with the outside world. On the one hand, the frontier is influenced by centers of culture and power, selectively adopting elements that originate from them. On the other hand, the frontier introduces unique regionalism and preserves common traditional traits of local groups. This tension between the inside and the outside worlds is expressed in local material culture. Given the persistent conflict between the image of the desert as both an isolated milieu and as a complex network of reciprocal relations, such an approach is of special relevance. Ethnographic studies among African tribes have shown that material culture has an important role in preserving identity of social groups in frontier zones, particularly in times of heightened interaction with other social groups. One of the most prominent elements by which groups and individuals typically declare social identity is decoration. Wisner and Hodder presented cases of tribal groups using decorated artifacts as a social strategy to preserve group boundaries. Studies on prehistoric tribal societies have illustrated how regionalism in material culture marks territory and social boundaries, and can thus explain limited distribution. In such cases, decoration was a reaction to the presence of additional group in a region and a means for preserving identity in a multicultural reality. Most historic examples of political and social comment in ceramics underscore the dominant political narrative of the time and place they were made, from the glazed brick and tiled monuments of Persia to the royal commemorative ware of the European monarchies, and the blue and white Delftware celebrating the growth of colonial trade. Ceramics have been used to normalize dominant political ideologies by means of ordinary, everyday things. It is not surprising then that the revolutionary and oppositionist movement have sought to overturn the process by using commonplace ceramic objects to project their visions, articulate their ideologies, and agitate among the masses. Attic red figureware depicts many aspects of Athenian social life, norms, and transgressions. Political and social comment often became the work of individuals and part of their identity and of organized political movements, as seen in their anti-slavery wear and the Soviet porcelain. How does that reflect on the Iron Age II Southern Levant? Earlier, we saw how monumental architecture, coupled with historical text, display the presence of imperial power in the desert, and manifest its ideology. Strategy and interest. Now we should counterbalance this view by looking at the ways memories of desert communities were embedded in their material culture. The key for decoding material culture assemblage of desert trading societies lies in the quotidian tasks, domestic architecture, cuisine, ritual, and mortuary practices. Spatial and quantitative analysis of decorated Edomite pottery unearthed at Aroer has emphasized several important elements. Its distribution is limited to Edom and the Negev, with the Beersheba Valley sites forming its northern border. Although it appears in the same archaeological context, Edomite pottery is a minority as compared to the local Judean assemblage. As stated, the decorated Edomite pottery from Aroer includes eating, drinking, serving, and ritual vessels. Storage vessels are not decorated in color. Prominent in the decorated Edomite group is the tendency towards individual expression. The Edomite assemblage includes, in addition to the decorated vessels, undecorated ware, and imported cooking pots, as well as ostraca and seals bearing Edomite script and names. It should be stressed that Edomite vessels in the urban space of Aroer were found in public and domestic spheres, but the lion's share was found in extramural areas. The appearance of locally produced decorated Edomite pottery allows for identification of one of the social groups that acted in the Judean frontier at the end of the Iron Age. Local groups of tribal origin, part of the Edomite cultural sphere, lived in the Negev towards the end of the Iron Age. The existence of imported Edomite cooking pots, the appearance of Edomite ostraca, seals, and inscriptions, and the unique objects from the shrine at Chorvat Kitmit supports this. On another occasion, I suggested that some of artifacts found in the late Iron Age 2000 sites were used as a declaration of power and social status among local elite groups of tribal origins who resided in Negev towns and maintained connections with the Assyrian royal court. The ceramic types presented at Aroer may suggest that the decorated Edomite vessels were utilized in communal feasts and rituals. Local potters took well-known Assyrian local potters, took well-known Assyrian forms, the carinated bows, and decorated them with black, red, and white geometric patterns. The motifs are employed in assorted compositions so that no two vessels are decorated in an identical manner. The language created by this pottery maintained an inner dialogue among the Edomite group members while leaving room for individual expression. The presence of the majority of these vessels in the extramural areas of the town of Aroer may point to the existence of an ethnic minority that carried out social activities on the margins of the town rather than at its core. By adopting forms that were common in the imperial core and provinces, Edomite decorated ware offers two views. Allegedly a stylistic choice, but in fact a social strategy. The style might disguise critique beneath an aesthetic presentation. The technique and the beauty blur the critique, allow it to be transmitted to the viewer or the user. It may reflect the ambivalence of the conqueror that conceived the conquered as different, yet similar. According to Homi Baba, the ambivalence breaks the chance for a total domination of the conqueror, since it creates a more complex, undecided field that doesn't follow the political dichotomic outlines. It rather blurs the borders between them and produces hybrid categories that also enable to bypass, to some extent, the essential obstacle of identity. On the one hand, local potters adopted imperial forms, yet at the same time, they chose to have preserved their identity and sense of belonging among the tribal group. Thus, the decorated vessels mark the boundaries of tribal territory, whether physical, ritual, or political, within the mosaic of the urban sphere. The use of Edomite types was meant to preserve certain social behaviors, he wants to say goodbye already, and convey messages on the tribal identity of its users. At a time when elites and agents of local tribes settled in an urban environment in the desert, and interacted with a variety of ethnic groups who took part in the Arabian trade. The decorated vessel enabled to declare identity and hybridity in a complex artistic way that is not available to the subject group otherwise. It challenges cultural definitions as well as political borders without an absolute truth. In part assimilates, in part subversive. The morphology of the vessel, locally produced and identified with the empire, was used as a canvas, atop of which local decorative motifs were individually added. By its very essence, the decorated vessel reflects the ambivalence of its producers and consumers. The ambivalence exposes the complexity of living under imperial auspice, calling us to abandon old myths in favor of more dialectical version of relations between empire and desert dwellers, a duovocal story. Thank you very much.